because when I'm traveling, water is like the hardest thing to get. Like some clean, water that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. Um, so I'm saying all that to say I think if we boil it all down, what we don't do is really care for one another. I think we have become a really selfish culture, and again, when I'm speaking of culture now, I just mean our country,
Hmm.
possibly globally, but I don't have any frame of reference for that. But what I will say, and I do think I have a pretty good frame of reference for this next comment. You mentioned in the United States, why don't we do what other countries do and make sure that our children are studying things that will be important for them in the future. And I would like to reference another one of my favorite movies, A Few Good Men, where at one point you have, gosh, well, I think this guy might have been a colonel, whatever, general, where he says, you can't handle the truth. That is what I heard in my mind when you said, why can't we do the same thing basically with our education system?
Hmm.
Um, I don't know where this started, but I'm positive this is where we are. We have systems in place that, okay, we have families that don't want to hear the truth about where their kids are. Again, not to be too specific, but there's statewide tests where if the testing comes out and your school or your kids or your community, your test scores didn't come back where we feel they should be as a nation, for example. And keep in mind, as a nation, we're still a lot lower than some of the other countries you mentioned. But what you get is pushback from parents. You're not holding my kid back, and all these other. It's almost like we're supposed to be on the same team, but we really have such opposing goals that
Hmm.
we're never gonna
Hmm.
win. Does that make sense? Like
Yep.
we're not gonna win. And so one of the reasons is that as an education system, I think we're more about coddling than actually instructing. And that's one part. Another thing you brought up, and I can speak to this personally. I don't know who's at the helm all the time. It is my fault as a student when I was given the advice, do not take typing or keyboarding because if you do, you'll always end up as somebody's secretary. I have to think that that was not an intentional ploy
Yeah.
to ruin my future and my career. I'm sure that that was true at some point in time. Might have been true when it was said to me. It's not true today because with the advent of the personal computer, we if you're not keyboarding, basically you're pecking. And if you're pecking, you're slow. And if you're slow, you're going to fall behind. And that's with anything. But at the time, that sounded like solid career advice for me. So, who's advising our young students? Who's advising the families? Right? A lot of times, students are making decisions about educational choices directly based from what they're hearing at home. So that means this message can't be just for little Johnny when he gets to school. This has to be a almost like a public service announcement. These are the pending careers, a lot of which we don't know.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I think we've learned since we've gotten into the 21st century is that so many, because of the rapid rate at which technology is advancing, there are a lot of jobs that we don't even know what they're going to be. So, what do you
Hmm.
teach somebody if you don't know what's coming? Well, you teach them critical thinking. You teach them core skills. What a huge pet peeve of mine, what people hopefully will stop calling soft skills. There's nothing soft about having collaboration skills. There's nothing
Yeah.
soft about what do they call it? Emotional intelligence. It's not soft about that. Those are core skills that even if you are a NASA qualified engineer, if you don't have those, you're going to have some issues. So, again, not to be on a soapbox, let's stop calling those soft skills, nothing soft about them. Bottom line, we need to prepare a generation of students for something that we don't even know exists. So that's the job for us. Meanwhile, like you said, in other countries, I feel like they've accepted reality more
Yeah.
and they're not trying to coddle families. And they're saying, hey, your kid needs to perform at this level. If they don't, we'll see them over at somebody's factory or whatever. To me, that would be incentive, really, unless
Hmm.
that's the life you want for your kids. But again, I think as a society, you said it yourself. You're like, well, if you just do 5 minutes of research, well, who's doing that? I feel like we've gotten lazy as a culture as well. And I'd rather you just tell me, preferably what I want to hear. You can tell me what I don't want to hear. I'll probably ignore you. But if you just tell me what I want to hear, then I can feel like, I've got information. I can go on with my day. That is not really how the real world works.
I agree. And I think going back to just how we're brought up here, I think that's one of the big reasons that you see China limiting so much of just social media because a lot of, like you said, it's basically what we're learning at home, and a lot of our kids and even our adults are being raised and thoughts are being formulated based on what they see on the internet. So whether that's with YouTube, what their friends comment on Facebook, what they see on the TV show they watch, all of that stuff, and it's really sad you think about it. All of that is what's really making, I feel like, today's generation. Whereas back in the day, you didn't have so many outside influences that were really just on you 24/7. Maybe there was a guy down the street that you saw was driving a Porsche and he was a drug dealer, but that wasn't in your ear as much as, I would hope not at least, as your mother saying, "Let me find out that you're dealing drugs," and you did. And you
That's a
see,
perfect example. Actually, it's almost like, have you been reading my diary? But yes, continue.
so I just think that's kind of what our issue is, and that's why you have so many behavioral problems and people are diagnosing their kids with all this stuff. And you have to think, how did you raise them? How did you bring them up? Did you always have them on a phone? Did you always have them on a tablet? Did you always have them outside? It could be some things that help. It could be some things that hurt. But those are things that you have to really focus on. And again, going back to what I said earlier, I feel like so many people don't hold accountability for themselves and they don't feel like they have to prove themselves. That's the biggest thing that you're seeing with a lot of these other countries is we're not just importing the Indians and the Chinese because we like them. They're showing that they're much better at these jobs than us. And that's something that I did see Elon Musk said a couple weeks ago when apparently he had just found out that so many of these people that were right-wing extremists were racist, so he says.
What?
But there was there's just so much, like he said, there was like I guess somebody posted this and he retweeted or whatever, but there was like a right and a tech right, and that's really what you're seeing here. And I don't think either one of those sides is necessarily correct. I don't think anybody on the left is 100% correct, but I think it is interesting that you're able to point that out, and yet you put over what $200 million toward this candidate. You didn't know that he was a right, not a tech right, or a lot of the people that voted for him were just right, not tech right. So my point being, we have to really, again, look in the mirror and hold accountability for ourselves. We can't be mad that everyone else is better than us. And you see a lot of that just in the workforce. People are jealous of you because you're better at your job than they are at their job. Sometimes you just have to work harder. Your bar shouldn't be, all right, I'm giving 20% and then somebody else is giving 100. I don't like that. Instead of giving 100 or even double my 20%, I'm going to see if I can get rid of them or get them to work at 10%. It's silly to me. And again, people wonder why we're falling behind to these other countries in terms of education, in terms of technology. There's a reason that literally the president had to put an initiative forward so that we could build our own chips because everyone does it better than we do. Yet we use most of the technology. That doesn't make any sense.